This is a Q Media production.
Welcome back to the Leading Change podcast. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Steph Chung, a seasoned technology and transformation leader with hands-on experience in industries ranging from media to finance to real estate and construction. Steph has held leadership roles at companies like CBRE, Foxtel, Fairfax, and Channel 7. Currently, she's the CIO at Kenvue, which was formerly known as Johnson & Johnson Consumer Health. Steph's dedicated her career to connecting business goals with technological innovation and team collaboration. In our conversation today, we take a playful spin on change, tackling everything from the twists of agile transformations to the all too real challenges of change fatigue. Steph shows us how to get every team member vibing on the same wavelength, sharing down-to-earth insights on building trust, taming your unruly data, and turning AI into your strategic sidekick. If you're looking for tips on driving change in a dynamic environment, then this episode is for you. Enjoy the podcast. Let's get into it. Hi, Steph. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Lauren.
Now, you have led technology and digital strategy across some huge organizations. What led you to this world of technology and transformation?
Well, I can't sit still, I think is really what it's come down to. I've always been someone who loves change and just, doing things at pace. So I just felt, the right space to be in. Even early on in my career, it's like, where is it all happening? Okay, it's happening in tech and it's changing all the time. And it's obviously proven to never stop. So yeah, it keeps well with my restlessness.
Maybe we'll put some scope around some of these projects because you've done some pretty awesome ones. Do you want to share maybe a recent big program that you have been part of?
Yeah. So a company before, we were rolling out Salesforce CRM, and that was in an environment that was very change resistant. So, it took a very long while. It was a very heavy lift. In fact, we made the decision, very boldly made the decision, got our CEO on board to not even touch the technology until the change management piece was done.
That's highly unusual. So let's maybe take a step back and put some context on this project because it must have been huge if it was 2 years of change management before. And I think the other thing that we'd probably want to also break down is what on earth does that even mean? Because most people think change management comes after the project. So first of all, put some scope. How big was this?
Yeah. So we were rolling it out to the entire organization, and it's relatively large across multiple markets. And what I had found when I came into the organization was that it had been attempted twice before. So it had happened, it failed, and it was like, okay, Steph, like final, third time lucky, it's yours, but everything's on the line. So I was very personally invested. And when we dug into why did it not work before, it was interesting that one of the biggest things that I found was the lack of sponsorship and buy-in from the executive team. So they would be telling the teams, yep, just use the software, make the IT people happy. But, after a while, they'll go away and leave us alone and we can go back to how we were doing things before. So when I uncovered this, I thought, okay, well, then we really need to have some specific stage gates around the executive team, first of all, because there would be no point even going out to the team members if the exec team was going to turn around and still, work in the background against the whole entire program. So it went so specific that we had individual change plans for each executive leader. It wasn't even something that we did like across the board.
Tell us what one of them might have looked like. What was in that plan?
Yeah. So, and they wouldn't know this. So, but we mapped everyone out. So we started out with interviewing each leader, understanding from them, like, in their own words, what did they see the benefits to be, just to see if they could even articulate it. Keeping in mind it was third attempt, right? And then starting to understand, like, what were their pain points. It was even down to, like, how do their teams operate today? So we would sit in team meetings, work alongside their teams and try and understand what their barriers were as well. And then you got a sense of, their attitude towards the change. So then based on that, we would map them out. There was like a quadrant that we were working towards, and then we were able to put together specific change plans, which encompassed anything from how often they needed a touch point, let's say with me, right? And whether that was education, whether that was assurance, whether it was just even keeping up, that partnership and the relationship to build the trust, all the way through to, there would be some more specific, tougher things that we would have to really work through to understand maybe not only that leader, but also the leadership, under them as well, who would have to come alongside. I don't like using the word, but the journey with us.
Yeah, there's some terminology that's probably a bit overused, but it does tell the story. So that's really interesting because, I think a lot of people get in and we talk about leadership alignment, and usually it's just how do we get everyone facing the same direction, which is generally conversation. But you actually had that additional layer of actually turning the executives before turning them facing the same way. So what were some tactics that you used to get them all working together?
So there was, I think, the individualized approach. I think in that sort of environment, and it was quite a competitive organization, you'd never wanted to bruise anyone's ego in front of everybody else. So definitely that one-on-one was a very specific tactic that we chose to go with rather than something that required like the entire leadership. In other organizations, you've been able to, talk to the entire leadership, get them all on board and everyone's like, yes. But in this specific example, it did need that personal touch. And to be honest, some of it was just like regular coffee catch-ups. To help, my business partners even just trust me on a personal level so that anything that I was going to do after that, they were like, okay, Steph's not just doing this because she wants to roll out technology. Steph's doing this because she can see real business benefit. This is something that's actually for the business and the organization. It's not just because I want to kick out of rolling a system out. Because at the end of the day, I would say, I don't need to do this. If you're not on board, we can pack up and we can walk away. But, I need you to understand what this means for your business and your organization. So it was even down to being able to map specific KPIs that we would be able to get towards.
A lot of listeners probably would be familiar with the Salesforce rollout. I mean, they're quite common. So once we actually got everyone on board, and 2 years, by the way, is an incredible amount of time to do that. So I'm guessing there was some sort of a moment where you said, yes, we're ready for the technology.
Yeah. And this might seem like a not very like measurable metric, but I have looked over the course of my career and I often find if I'm no longer the spokesperson for that initiative, I've done my job, right? So at the end of the day, if I actually, that my sponsor, my business partner, whoever that is, they're able to get up and they can pitch the project, they can talk about the benefits, they can get in front of the whole organization and do that really articulately and confidently without me feeding them the information, then I'm like, okay, that's my job is done. And so, a lot of it was, recognizing that we had gotten to such a point of such strong sponsorship. And, admittedly, like some of the real naysayers probably weren't 100% there, but I was like, okay, there's 70, 80% there. That's okay. Like that's going to be good enough. You can't change everybody. But we did have solid sponsorship, CEO, 2 critical executive leaders, people with high influence across the business who were able then to articulate that. And that for me was, okay, then we're good to go. Now we can touch the tech because the people side of things, has been tackled.
So you've now gotten everybody on board, most people on board in any case, and it's time to start the technology piece. Now, I'm sure you've been through other technologies, whether it was Salesforce or other ones. How would you rate the technology rollout? Because I think most people would say you jump right in with the tech and the configuration and, let's just get the Salesforce piece in. Having done all of that extra work, what did the rollout then look like?
Yeah, I actually always say the tech's the easy part. Whether it's that CRM one, anything else that we've done, that's the easy part because it's the people, hearts and minds. It's changing business process and ways of working. That's always the toughest bit. So it was almost like even when I look back on that initiative, you don't almost remember because it was all your stock standard stuff after that, right? And then we were very particular around the rollout plan. So that took a lot of workshopping, a lot of options. Again, a lot of like getting the business buy-in. Okay, which teams, who's most on board? Okay, that exec leader is the one that's been a true sponsor. We start with their team, but then also pick one of the difficult teams, right? And then do pilots. I'm a big believer in doing pilots and then being really clear, like don't just go, oh, pilot, we move on. Yeah, we're straight in to go. It's okay, then we take stock. What are those lessons learned? What do we need to pivot? Reassess the change plan. What are the other things that are going to come up against us? How do we plan for that? And then carry on through. And then it's all your standard, like, your training, how you flex your communications, again, according to the teams and where they're at. And so it's constant reassessing and mapping on what the attitude is to the change, not the system, but the change that was coming with it. And then hypercare. And I always tell any project team that I'm with, like to your point you were saying earlier, the change management often comes afterwards. I said the project is the easy part. Now the real work begins, is sticking with it, right? Because I think when organizations talk about a failed project, it's because not necessarily the delivery's gone wrong, but it's mostly to do with, everything else after that. Did they stick with it? Did they see the benefits come after it? If they didn't see the benefits, it's possibly because there wasn't someone like tracking it and keeping it going. So for us, we kept those sponsors. Like those sponsors weren't like one and done after that delivery go live. They had to stick with, and we kept up those targets, it was still fed into all the executive team's KPIs. It was a competitive environment. So we had leaderboards on, anything from user adoption to, any other sort of KPI they had.
It's so interesting because you hear this number, 70, 80, whatever % of transformations fail. And we all know that if we keep reading, it's exactly as you say, it's the objectives have failed rather than the actual project. And I love that you've actually said it's often because we don't even measure the objective. So how do we even know that we met them? And I also love we've got that ownership out the other side of it. And I think that really is key. So if that's the case, a lot of companies use external change resources. And often I find that's the reason they don't often get continually measured, because they put them in this incredible change plan and these are our change objectives. And then we come out the other end and it doesn't get handed to anyone. So it sounds like you've inbuilt it. Did you use external change, or because you're talking about change existing, how did you actually do it with resourcing?
Yeah, we were running things internally. And that was probably a result of, they'd done it externally before. And so it was trying a different way. I think it was a lot of building trust in myself and the team that we had existing as well. Like we obviously brought people in to augment, but essentially it was run internal to the organization. And even now, we've been running agile transformation inside the company. Again, it's actually all being done internally. So yeah, it's a really interesting point because I've kind of never thought about when you've got the individuals who are there seeing it through and, you get very invested. Yeah, you're right. It makes a really big difference.
So you've just touched on doing an agile transformation. I think a lot of people would be a bit bamboozled and say, what on earth does that mean? I think, first of all, people who do know what agile is still have different definitions of it. What is an agile transformation? What does that actually mean for a business?
Yeah. So I'll explain what it's meant for us. And I'm apologize to any agile purists out there because I'll be like mortified. But it was probably about 2 years ago, I was asked to start leading our agile transformation. And not just from an IT perspective. It was actually something we were going to do for the organization business wide. And, similarly, this organization isn't as, change resistant or anything like that. I think we're very lucky. Our CEO was somebody who wanted to see this happen. It's something she'd seen in another market happen really well and really transform how the business operated. So it's like, okay, let's do this for Australia and New Zealand. But, same sort of approach, really trying to understand and unlock what is going on for the organization. And how we've approached it. So we did a 3-week immersion program. We chose, again, pilot approach. So a big driver for this was actually to see us have more cross-collaboration. So, quite a siloed organization, traditionally, fragmented, wanted to be able to see cross-functional collaboration, see our teams work end to end. And so that whole idea of a scrum and how we operate, but also how do we make decisions faster, how are we more efficient, and how we get to business outcomes was also another factor. So we were doing things like trying to understand how many meetings people were having, what those meetings were about, how do you actually connect between departments today, understanding all of that sort of stuff before we then ran the immersion program and got these 2 pilot cross-functional teams trained basically. So, I'm sure people out there have already heard like there's this Lego training thing that you do and you say, oh, if you did it this way, a waterfall way, what turns out versus an agile way, etc. And then learnt the principles and then, we've gone from there. So, I think to your point of like sticking with it, we started really small and to be honest, like we're still always just chipping away. And I've built an ongoing roadmap. So this roadmap goes for multiple years. So year 1 was really just get into the operational rhythms, get the cadence, get people used to working in scrums, using Kanbans, us figuring out, do we like Kanbans that are like Post-it noted or in a digital thing? And then we worked out actually people are finding digital really hard. We'll stick with Post-it notes, which is tough for me, but I'm okay with it now. To then, okay, like what does it look like to then roll this out further? We're still tackling things like how do we bring new starters into that rhythm? And so then, I'm a big believer in like maturity curves to help, guide us and map us. So, we've started with operational. It's become, okay, what's the next piece around, the collaboration part and how do we look at that? And then, ultimately it's how does that help us be customer obsessed? And again, so it's step-by-step mapping towards there.
And so just to the scope, so this is just IT that we're looking at to putting this agile ways of working.
We're doing it end-to-end across the business actually. So it's sales, marketing, supply chain. It's beyond IT.
So that is a huge piece of work because I think most people would just say IT is agile. And I think we know, years ago, ANZ, I think was the first bank that did it across the board. And it was huge. It went on for years. So I take your point that it's piecemeal by piecemeal. So, I think if that's the case, then when we talk about IT, they kind of get it, right? They've already been doing it. If we're trying to change entire ways of working for a sales team, a marketing team, can you paint like a day in the life and how you got them to even envision how this might work for them? Because this is a huge change.
Yeah. And to be honest, it was even hard for me to wrap my head around, because to your point, like it is very easy from a technology software project, it's easier to make tangible how it works. So we did grapple with it ourselves, to be perfectly honest. But that's why we looked at things like meetings and meeting cadence. And we kind of anchored on that as one of the benefits because we're such a meeting heavy organization. And yet the decisions weren't necessarily being made fast enough, or there were stall points, or, what were those things that were stalling us? Or the other thing that we were trying to tackle was like people were so busy, how do you help prioritize, right? Which is another whole piece around like agile and your backlogs and all that sort of stuff. So we just started with that whole, Kanban piece. We actually mapped out the sort of meetings that the organization was having across the board that were cross-functional meetings, right? So any meeting that was kind of like within a team, we kind of left those alone, but things that required us to work cross-functionally, let's map those out. Let's roughly work out like how much time would that take? And then how can we actually change that approach into something that's more like, your 30-minute stand-ups, making it visible, and that was actually a big part of it. Was there were so many aha moments when people just put down on Post-its like what it is that they do in a day. And when the teams, for the first time it was visible for each other, there was this like real like shock. And so that ability of making things visible, giving empathy to each other, those were the elements that really helped.
So you get them on piece by piece. So it sounds like we picked like that low-hanging fruit. You get them saying, oh, wait, hang on, you've helped us with our meetings. So now you can help us with other things and we start to build that trust.
Yeah. And I think, that's a big part of it. Like I often say a big part of my role is how do you build that trust so that almost at a point, anything you say or ask for, they go, okay, I know where that comes from. I know that comes from a really good place. That comes from a place of really caring about the business, caring about our employees. So yeah, I think that's important.
Do you want your team to achieve peak performance? Well, then it's time for a change. Welcome to Leading Edge. We're not about traditional training. We're about transformation. Our outcomes-based leadership development programs focus on real results through behavior change and mindset shifts. We customize programs tailored to your team's needs, packed with cutting-edge content based on neuroscience and positive psychology. We run engaging workshops, personalized coaching sessions, and practical exercises to ensure an enriching experience for your team. How does it work? We dive deep. We start with surveys to identify strengths and gaps, which helps us to design a bespoke program designed for your team's success. With our approach, progress is inevitable. Our expertly facilitated workshops and coaching sessions ensure growth, and the results speak for themselves. Are you ready to take the leap? It's simple. First, choose your program. We have 5 to choose from, or you can customize a program to suit your team's needs. Second, pick your duration. We deliver 3, 6, or 12-month programs. This way, we can reinforce the learnings over time to drive real change. And finally, plan with us. Each team is different, so we make sure that what we're delivering is exactly what you need. Let's unlock your team's potential together. Contact us today, and let's start this journey to transform your team to achieve greatness. So you said that, Agile has a whole toolkit of different things that we can pick. And so Kanban and meetings were ones that we kind of picked as the first ones off the rank. I think a lot of businesses, they hear this purist view and they go, okay, we're going to be working in 2 weeks increments and we're going to deliver every 2 weeks. And I'm a lawyer and I can't write my piece of paper in 2 weeks. We've got these kind of pushbacks, but it sounds like you didn't do it that way.
Yeah.
You did it in a way that you actually were able to hand pick. So how did you get everyone on board to say, we're doing it Agile, but it's not exactly what you think?
Yeah. We talked a lot around, and I would present at town halls and things about this, that we're not doing it for the methodology. And we were almost prepared to say, and again, sorry, Agile purists, but almost to say it isn't about the methodology. And if we're not going to do it exactly like that, that's okay. It's about the principles. And so we were always very much, it's about a way of working. It's about how we build in collaboration across the business and ultimately how that collaboration helps us to be customer obsessed. And so we would communicate around the principles. And the other piece was we never wanted it to feel onerous because I think, and many organizations feel this way. You often hear about the change fatigue, being super mindful of that. We didn't want this to feel like, oh, this is just another thing we have to do, because that was some of the pushback we were getting. Oh, we've already had to do this or we've already had to do that. And now you're getting us to do something else. It's like, okay, no, what's these little mechanisms? Like it got to a point where I was publishing little tips and tricks on the back of the toilet doors because I was like, I can't run another training session. Like the business does not have capacity, but we also can't put brakes on it. So, I had silly things like a little, this is really funny to say, but we had a mascot, an Agile mascot. And the name's Aggie, the Agile mascot. And it's I'm sorry to say this on your podcast. It's like a rainbow poo because our little tagline was like around reducing wastage. So it felt really appropriate to then have back of the toilet door posters to keep our Agile transformation going.
Nothing like a great theme to drag through the whole program. I love that.
So look, if you want to take that as a good piece of advice, you can tell I'm willing to try anything.
So this really was a culture change. This was a culture transformation. I mean, it is ways of working because I think, a lot of leaders out there, they might not have technology as part of it. It really is changing thoughts and hearts and minds. What were some of the business outcomes you got?
Yes. So definitely, the reduction in meetings, I think was a part of it. We did see that shift of more cross-functional collaboration and definitely the mantra of working end to end. So I think that was probably even more than the meetings piece. It was really around, we did see teams who didn't necessarily operate together, now operating together. It's at a point now where, so we have just started hot desking. We have our neighborhoods that are in those like cross-functional teams and starting to get people thinking about, who are the people you need to work with for that week or on that daily basis, right? So there is that mindset that now is more natural that just wasn't there before. Like I remember when I first walked into the organization, that sort of silo was so obvious, whereas now there is more of that blend. So that to me, looking back, is one of the biggest changes.
And has it impacted any things like customer satisfaction, employee engagement scores?
Yes. So we track, we do have our customer surveys that go out, whether it's big retailers and that sort of thing. And I think ease of working with us is one of the things that we measure. I'm sure there's lots of things that contributes to the score being more positive in terms of ease of working with us. But, I'd like to think that the collaboration and that, swifter processing and decision-making has definitely, helped that outcome as well.
I want to switch gears now because those have sound like very successful projects. Let's talk about some challenge areas that you've come across over the years because I'm pretty sure they weren't all smooth sailing. Thinking about, some of the big programs or transformations that you've been part of, what were some of the key themes of some kind of big whoopsies, issues that you came across, things that you would have done differently? Do you have any examples?
So, and maybe it's because I've blocked them from my memories. I think part of the thing as well is I've often been the person who inherits a project that has failed before. It seems to be the thing that follows me through my career. So the investment to make sure that it doesn't go wrong again. I'm doing something currently as well, which isn't that similar thing. It's like twice before it's failed, third time. So I think that's part of it. I think I've often learnt from the previous lessons learnt. So something like the CRM experience and taking that slower is also probably come from, the lessons learned of like what went wrong before. Or the project that I've been on at the moment, what didn't work was that there wasn't right sponsorship, and it wasn't right sponsorship at the right level of the hierarchy, if you want to call it that. So, I often feel, and it's kind of a dichotomy, right? Because we work in a society where everything is going faster. Obviously, tech's, rapidly, exponentially changing a lot faster. But to actually realize, like at the end of the day, people and process, the change is still slow. Like I remember a conversation I had in one of my previous organizations. The fear wasn't about the CRM. The fear one day, this person was finally honest with me and said, I can't even work out internet banking, Steph. So what you're asking me to do is so scary. We got to that point where I was actually able to reveal that and be vulnerable about that. So I think it's more recognizing that things don't always have to go at pace is probably the biggest lesson learned.
And it's probably one of the most challenging because you strike me as someone who wants to just get shit done.
Yeah. Well, there is that. So I have learnt severe amounts of patience because I started out my career in very high paced. But my role has very much evolved over the years. So yeah, I'm comfortable now with that slow change. I bake on the side so that I am able to deliver something more regularly and swiftly.
But yeah, baking is a nice way to come,
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned swift change of technology at pace. And, a lot of businesses, if they haven't started the AI journey, they're certainly considering it. Tell us, have you started the AI journey at your business?
Yeah, we have. And, like other organizations, I would say, we haven't because we're still just trying to clean up the mess of data that we have. But here, very, very lucky, those foundations have been laid, so we are starting that out. And, even just this week, we're still trying to navigate, like, what does the governance of that look like? How do we triage that? How much does that need to be IT running it? How much can you have your citizen developers? So, we're navigating a lot of those conversations, but we've got a few things going on at the moment. So, for example, all our OKRs, so all the, performance goals that our team members do now is run by AI. So you basically, based on your role, what region you're in, the business objectives, then it kind of, spits it all out. You can adapt it, what your initiatives are. It will tell you if they're poorly written, which my first cut was. So it says go back and do it again. So yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how that evolves.
Oh, I'll tell you what, I bet a lot of leaders would love that
I know.
performance review time.
Exactly.
That's the most exhausting bit.
Yeah.
Now, you kind of just started to talk about the things that you need to have in place to have a successful AI. So you talked about data and governance. And so let's actually break that down a little bit to sort of a more structured process. So if a business is looking to start bringing AI in, what would be the process you would look at to even get started? And what are those foundations you need in place before you know you can actually build?
Yeah. I mean, it's the classic like rubbish data in, rubbish data out, right? So I think that's still a big part of it. And, for us and in other places, when things are disparate and all of that sort of stuff, it's like, how do you clean up even at a basic level? The infrastructure side, you do all those pieces first. And then there is the flip side to that, which is what are you actually using it for? Because I think what's often, any organization, right, any place, especially when you don't fully understand things, you're like, well, that's the latest hype. I want to jump on that. Even just things like process automation, the number of times, a business partner will say, oh, like automate that. And I'm like, well, you still need to do the work to clean that up first, because otherwise you're just getting to a bad result faster. Right. So it's the same thing, I think, in the data world. And it's coming up with scenarios and use cases that actually add value, and not just having some other, shiny toy that, we go, oh, it's the cool thing to do and we've done this. It's like, okay, something like doing performance goals that people know it's a necessity but don't necessarily love doing. How do you actually find those use cases that's going to make a difference?
So how did you find those use cases?
Yeah, I mean, it's work in progress at the moment. We started out in the HR space probably because it was the most straightforward. They had systems that were already centralized. They had good processes. They had things already that were quite repetitive, right? So anything from writing job descriptions, through to the performance goals, we have started there. This year, we're starting to look at other parts of the organization, and we've started, we're running a project at the moment that is going to, cut across 2 regions. It seems like a good point as well to, see how we could utilize automation and AI to help that project. So, it's a mix of things. And then, we had a governance session this week to try and work out, okay, what are those other use cases? And you're trying to balance, especially when you're in a multinational organization, right? You're trying to find that balance between efficiency and what's going to bring you like bang for buck, right? Across multiple teams, multiple markets. So, we're in that negotiation at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that's a really big question, because we always want that return on investment. And particularly, I think I'm seeing a lot of articles that are saying AI isn't bringing the ROI, particularly things like just, the standard, the Copilot, the ChatGPT, those ones are definitely not bringing return on investment. It's individual productivity, but not team. What you're talking about is the enterprise AI, and it sounds like, it's saving time for your HR professionals and probably making your performance review process better. Can you put some dollar figures around that? Have you been able to measure that?
Yeah, I'm not across whether they've actually turned that into dollars. We have been doing it. We've also been doing it for, like our social media posts, right? Because we've got a huge portfolio of brands. So, those sorts of things. Whether someone's measuring it, I mean, it's certainly not been visible to me, to be honest. But I would dare say, I would assume so. And even in the conversation we've had this week around how we're going to prioritize the initiatives, it's a lot clearer to say, okay, what is that ROI? How's it going to be measured? Those sorts of things. I think where we've been in the last year is probably because we're in that experimenting stage. So maybe it's been okay, but the conversation's definitely shifted. So I'm sure, from here on in, it is going to be very clear. Well, if you're going to get prioritized, you're going to have to really pitch the business case, which, to your point, that's when I put my hand up to say, well, we run a lean team. How, it's not going to be so dollar value It's how is that person going to be able to put their time into something else that's more value add? And those are the things that are hard to put a specific measure to.
It is, and it is really hard, I think, with the dollar value,
Yes.
because I think sometimes employee satisfaction, because you're going to get people who aren't burning out, you're going to get people who actually enjoy their job and actually want to work on their career. So I think sometimes we probably stretch to that dollar figure when maybe actually the people satisfaction might even be a better measure.
And we do measure that. We have, our employee engagement surveys and things around, tools, resource, your ways of working. Has that been made easier? So, yeah, we're tracking all of those sorts of things. But again, whether you can go, oh, was that specifically, that AI piece of technology that helped, is it everything holistic? I mean, it all comes together in a package, right? So
I just want to talk about your role for the minute, because I think the role of CIO probably needs to be demystified. So what does a CIO do?
Look, and it could be the way that I'm approaching it, because I think when I talk across the industry, people are at different stages and it depends on the organization or the industry you're in. So I will caveat with that. For me, I see my role now, and probably in the last 5 to 10 years, to be a real pivot from hardcore project delivery to now being a change agent, to needing to be a really strong business partner, and to educate, really educate the leadership team and make sure that they're as across things as I am in this space. So it's a lot more stakeholder management. It's understanding business strategy, right? So, and I always will say, business strategy first, and we're the enabler. But of course, these days as well, those things, in an ideal world, and I think in a really successful organization, it's all comes together. They're not even separate things anymore. They shouldn't be separate things anymore. So how am I enabling our executive teams to actually, interweave it all together? Yep. And then, we're in the world of tech, so you've got to find ways to keep your eye, of what's ahead and what's going to impact the industry. And make sure you're playing an advisor role, at the end of the day. And I say this to my team, right? I don't think it's just as a CIO. I think all technology teams need to be in a place where they've shifted from being that order taker, back office, which is what we used to be, hide us in the dungeon corner, to now being, okay, how are you the advisor to your peers, to your stakeholders, making sure that, you're somebody that they can go to.
And if we flip to the other side and we say, I'm a business person, either a C-suite or in leadership role, how do I get the most out of my IT team?
I think at the end of the day, even if I see my team now, there's still an ability to roll up my sleeves and make sure I'm happy to kind of get into, some of the challenges that we're working through. But I also work really hard to build a team that's also cross-functional. So, it's never about oh, you're just about that product, or you're just about, that project, but how are you linking in with your peers? How are you building really good partnerships, helping unlock the network for them as well, especially when you're in a really large organization. How is the network for that team being unlocked for them? So they can be more effective in that role. So they also can be, change agents in what they're doing and recognize, so I talked about maturity curves before. I have my own maturity curve for the IT team, which is all around shifting us from order taker to collaborating to being, advisors to the business. So even in that, how do we actually build those stronger business partnerships? I think that's what businesses are wanting from us now, right? And it's still, unfortunately, I find still kind of a rare skill set to find IT people who are also willing to partner strongly with the business, be good communicators. So there's still a bit of the, that shift happening, because, you can find a really good technologist, but at the end of the day, the really good technologist would still be building tech for tech's sake. You need a really good technologist who also knows how to be, a great communicator and business savvy.
And how do you think we can start, getting awareness that these are the skills of the future in IT, and then actually start upskilling and putting those capabilities within our IT teams?
Yeah. I, would hope that it's being seen as, more important. And I think we are in a different stage, in recruiting, where it's not just about all the certifications. someone's received. But I think because businesses are specifically asking for people who are partners, even when I've talked across the industry or you talk to recruiters and so on, they are asking, organizations are recognizing, oh, it's really nice to have someone who knows how to talk to me, understand my business needs, and then translate it into a solution, as opposed to the other way around, which is like, I've got a solution, I'm pushing it on. So, I think those skills need to be equally valued, as much as those certifications are helpful. And of course, all of us in tech have a whole myriad of them. But it's also recognizing negotiation skills are really important, influencing skills are really important, and how we're making sure that that's equally valued to your tech certifications.
If we are going to give advice to people who are embarking on these big changes, whether it be a technology change, a process change, ways of working change, what are some pieces of advice you'd give to a leader who's starting to embark on that journey?
So people and process first is really at the heart of it, more than the technology would be the key one. And I think the other one would be, it's piecemeal by piecemeal. Like I'm often saying to the team, we're chipping away. So it's not always going to be like from 0 to 100 in the space of months. Sometimes it is chipping away. And then all of a sudden you look back and you're like, oh my goodness, look how far we've come. And that's going to be the most sustainable way to build around, that sort of transformation in an organization.
Fantastic. Steph, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for being here. Where can our audience find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn and yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe. Taking just 2 minutes to leave a review on Apple Podcasts would mean the world. Your reviews play a vital role in expanding the reach of this podcast and making a bigger impact.